Some characters are so boring they become unforgettable. Yeah, while loud personalities steal the spotlight, it's the quiet ones that haunt you long after the story ends. It sounds ridiculous, right? How can being boring, literally the opposite of interesting, somehow make someone fascinating? Well, that's what we're getting into today, because sometimes the lack of noise is the message, and once you notice it, it's hard to look away. Let's face it, we live in a world that worships charisma. You open social media and everyone's performing, selling their personality like it's a brand. Everyone wants to be that person. You know, the one who dominates the room, the one with the stories, the one who always has the perfect comeback. And then there's the boring one, the quiet coworker, the YouTuber who doesn't scream into the mic, the movie character who doesn't really do anything flashy. They fade into the background until suddenly you realize you've been thinking about them way more than you expected to. That's the trick of subtlety. When everyone's trying to be the main character, the one person who isn't trying starts to stand out. Let's look at Keanu Reeves. The man is literally one of the calmest, most reserved celebrities alive. Soft-spoken, polite, borderline awkward sometimes. But that's what makes him so fascinating. In an industry built on ego, he's allergic to it. He sits on park benches alone, takes the subway, and talks about grief and kindness like a philosopher who just happens to know kung fu. He's not flashy, he's still. And that stillness makes people curious, because in a world addicted to attention, someone who doesn't seem to crave it feels almost mysterious. Now let's talk fiction, because this idea hits even harder in storytelling. Think about Pam Beesly from The Office. On paper, she's not exciting. She's not outrageous like Michael Scott or over the top like Dwight. She's quiet, she's polite, and she paints in her spare time. Boring, right? But by season 3, people are rooting for her like she's the emotional core of the show. Why? Because in the middle of all that chaos, Pam's normalcy feels real. It grounds the story. She becomes the mirror, the person through whom we see everyone else's insanity. And when she does make a bold move like leaving Roy or standing up for herself, it hits harder because we've watched her build up to it quietly. Her boring nature makes her growth more satisfying. Or look at BoJack Horseman. Todd, BoJack's friend, seems aimless, goofy, and low energy compared to everyone else. But as the show goes on, Todd becomes one of the deepest characters, content with simplicity, refusing to chase fame or validation. In a show about ego and self-destruction, Todd's boringness is his peace. Boring characters force us to slow down. They remind us that not every story needs explosions to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the biggest truths. Let's bring it back to real people for a second, because boring is often just another word for authentic. Take David Attenborough. The man speaks like a lullaby. No screaming, no jump cuts, no gimmicks, just a calm British voice describing trees for 50 years, and people love him. Why? Because he radiates passion without performance. You can feel that he's not pretending to care. He does care. Or take someone like Zendaya. She's not loud, she's not constantly chasing controversy, but everything about her presence feels intentional. She lets her work speak louder than her interviews. That restraint, it's fascinating, because you want to know what's going on behind that calm surface. Even in the YouTube world, think about creators like Nathan Zed or T1J. They're not doing crazy stunts or screaming into a camera. They're just talking slowly, thoughtfully, and chill. And yet, people hang on to every word, because there's a difference between being boring and being quietly magnetic. Boring people are interesting because they make you lean in. They don't shove themselves at you. They pull you toward them. Psychologically speaking, our brains crave novelty, but not chaos. When everything around us is loud, the calmest thing in the room becomes the most noticeable. It's called contrast attention. That's why in a movie full of explosions, the quiet scene where the hero just sits and thinks can feel more powerful than all the action before it. The silence forces us to pay attention. It's also why, in social settings, people who don't over-explain themselves seem more mysterious. You fill in the blanks yourself. You project meaning onto them. That's why boring people often seem deeper, not because they're trying to be, but because they don't reveal everything. Mystery is born from restraint. The writer Susan Cain, in her book Quiet, said there's zero correlation between being the best talker and having the best ideas. That hits home. Being boring, being reflective, measured, and private doesn't mean you lack depth. It often means you're processing it before you perform it. Let's be real, in today's world where everyone's oversharing, overselling, and overperforming, being boring might be the most rebellious thing you can do. You don't have to be the loudest person in the room to matter. You don't have to post every thought or have a hot take on every trend. Sometimes being a little dull is a quiet protest against a world that never shuts up. Bob Ross is one of those rare figures who proved that gentleness can be just as powerful as charisma. On the surface, what he did was incredibly simple. He stood in front of a canvas, spoke softly, and painted landscapes filled with happy little trees. No drama, no flashy editing, no celebrity attitude. Yet decades after his show The Joy of Painting ended, Bob Ross remains a cultural icon. What made him so captivating wasn't what he painted, but how he did it. His voice was calm, his movements were steady, and his attitude radiated kindness. He didn't rush or show off. He invited viewers to slow down and find peace in the act of creation. In the 1980s, when television was dominated by loud commercials and fast-talking hosts, Bob Ross was the exact opposite. A soft, patient presence. That contrast made him unforgettable. Watching him paint felt almost meditative, like he was giving people permission to breathe. And that's where the deeper truth lies. Being boring isn't really boring at all when it's rooted in self-assurance. Bob Ross never tried to impress anyone or chase trends. He didn't need to. His calmness came from confidence in knowing who he was and being completely comfortable with it. That's the quiet kind of strength most people overlook. In a world where everyone feels pressure to perform, to shout for attention, or to constantly prove their worth, someone like Bob Ross reminds us that peace can be powerful. His gentle demeanor said, "I don't need to compete, I just need to be." And that's why his legacy endures. He showed us that calm isn't weakness and simplicity isn't dullness. It's confidence, the kind that whispers instead of screams. One of the most fascinating examples of this in storytelling is Breaking Bad's Skyler White. For years, fans called her boring, even annoying compared to Walter White. But when you actually pay attention, Skyler is the most realistic person in the show. She reacts like a normal human being in a world that's falling apart. She doesn't go wild, she doesn't monologue, she just endures. And that's exactly why she got so much hate. People weren't used to seeing a realistic, quiet woman standing next to a dramatic anti-hero. But years later, critics rewatched the show and realized she wasn't boring. She was right. Sometimes the boring character is the one who tells the truth that everyone else is too distracted to see. Even in real life, you see that dynamic play out. The loud personalities get all the headlines, but it's often the calm, consistent people who actually change things. The ones who show up every day, do the work, and stay out of the drama. There's this Japanese concept called ma, which means the space between things, the pause, the silence that gives meaning to sound, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. Boringness, when you think about it, is just space. It's the quiet between chaos, the part that makes the noise make sense. So when a character or a person feels boring, maybe they're not lacking depth. Maybe they're the pause that allows you to actually see depth in everything else. Because when you strip away the drama, the shouting, the performance, what's left? The real stuff, the small moments, the subtle gestures, the humanity that's easy to miss when everything's loud. That's what makes boring fascinating. It's not that they're doing less, it's that they're showing us more by doing less. If you've ever been told you're boring, maybe you're the quiet one in your friend group, the one who doesn't always have something to say. This is your sign that being bored isn't bad. It might actually be your superpower. Because the truth is, being interesting isn't about volume, it's about presence. It's about having something worth saying, even if you only say it once. Think of all the people you admire, the ones who speak rarely, but when they do, everyone listens. The ones who don't need to tell you who they are, because you can feel it. That's the kind of boring that changes lives. So next time you meet someone who doesn't seem that exciting, pay attention. They might be the most fascinating person in the room. Stop chasing interesting. Rather chase authenticity. Watch how your world slows down and suddenly becomes way more meaningful. If this hits home for you, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or called boring, drop a comment below and tell your story. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Cause boring, yeah, boring might just be the new fascinating.